October 5th will mark the 60th anniversary of the James Bond franchise. As an avid fan of the series, I have decided to commemorate that date by reviewing all of the films from my least favourite to my most favourite. Please be warned, these reviews will involve spoilers. Also, I will be including the 1967 James Bond spoof Casino Royale and the unofficial 1983 Bond film Never Say Never Again in my rankings. Tomorrow Never Dies was the 18th official James Bond film and the second to star Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. The film sees Bond investigate the mysterious sinking of the HMS Devonshire. Through his investigations, Bond learns that media mogul Elliot Carver has made a deal with General Chang to start a war between Britain and China in return for exclusive broadcasting rights in that country. The biggest drawback with Tomorrow Never Dies is that its central theme, that of the mass media's ability to control the dissemination of information, and thereby the populace, is never explored in an interesting or dynamic way. In the film, Elliot Carver uses his media empire to manufacture events and thereby manipulate public opinion. This reflects both the propaganda campaigns used by places like Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, and the predilection of various media companies, social and otherwise, to manipulate public opinion. Sadly, rather than exploring that theme to its fullest extent, Tomorrow Never Dies instead presents us with a haphazard story which flits from one mundane action sequence to another. The bulk of the film is devoted to fistfights, shootouts, and car chases, with little to no time being devoted to storytelling, the exploration of themes or motifs, or the development of characters. Speaking of characters, there is little here to get excited about. Pierce Brosnan delivers a stellar performance despite the weak script he has to work with. Unfortunately, most of the film's running time is devoted to moments of action, stunts and so forth, then moments of real depth. The few moments that Brosnan has to show his acting chops are, however, outstanding. The Bond girls, Paris Carver and Wei Lin, can hardly be described as inspiring. I agree with Joe Darlington's assertion that Terry Hatcher was completely miscast as Paris Carver. Ditto for Wei Lin too. I'm sorry, but it takes more than some goofy kung fu to set my heart aflutter. The villains are hardly inspiring either. General Chang is barely seen, though he is talked about. Stamper is a bargain basement version of Red Grant, and he's actually a highlight of the film. And the only memorable thing about techno-terrorist Henry Gupta is that he is played by magician Ricky Jay. The two most interesting characters are Dr. Kaufman, the sadistic professor of forensic medicine, and Elliot Carver. Unfortunately, Dr. Kaufman isn't on screen nearly as long as he could have been. Some attempts were made to give Carver an interesting backstory and some personality, but a lot of it falls flat because the film doesn't give us enough time to get to know him. As a consequence, Carver appears to be little more than a cookie-cutter Bond villain. Another significant problem with the film is that much of the film is action for action's sake. It is admittedly well choreographed. However, the direction, cinematography, and editing have the tendency to leave me feeling flat. Tomorrow Never Dies comes across as a generic late 90s action film, and that's a problem. A Bond film should sit above the fray. An apt description for this film is that it is like a video game, and not a very clever video game at that. Like a video game, every non-action sequence only serves as a prelude for the next action sequence. There is literally a scene where Bond drives his car by remote control. Tomorrow Never Dies could have been a much better film if more attention had been paid to story and character construction than over-the-top action sequences. My favourite moment in Tomorrow Never Dies is the scene in which Bond is waiting in his hotel room for Elliot Carver's men to show up. It's a pure Bond moment. He's sitting there in his shirt sleeves, Walther PPK at his side, and a glass of vodka in his hand. It reminds me of the classic scene in Dr. No between Professor Dent and James Bond. My least favourite moment is the direction and the editing, both of which are horrible.